Growth and Natural Resources today, June 12th. We have a very full caseload today on the agenda, so we will start with, let me just do a little housekeeping. There will not be another Growth and Natural Resources meeting until August. So we're going to start with items Z319, Harrington Street and Peace Street. So we might bring staff first. And if I might just make a few comments before you start. I think on this case, Z319, there were some outstanding questions related to transportation by the committee, and then there were some things I think the applicant wanted to discuss, so we're ready to begin.
Of course. So this is before you on May 29th. As you said, there are some outstanding questions. We have responses to those prepared by transportation staff. Again, a request to rezone just under 3 acres from DX12 with the shopfront frontage and DX12 to DX40 with the shopfront frontage and conditions, and DX40 and conditions. Again, looking at the site, it is at the intersection of Peace and Harrington, and it's also bound by Johnson Street and Capitol Boulevard. The conditions you previously considered are here. Since that meeting, a new set of conditions were added to the request, citing some lighting requirements for the parking deck, similar to the Citrix deck downtown, a trigger for a traffic impact analysis based on development review and a specific threshold there, and a condition that the owner would pay $1 million to the city's affordable housing program. So those are new conditions. There's a memo that was included for your consideration in the agenda packet that talks about the tool we use to calculate development intensities. It's the Envision Tomorrow analysis that we conduct based on the request you made and some assumptions on the information that the applicant has shared. We updated that Envision analysis specifically with regard to the parking assumptions and the ratio that we use to calculate development intensity, and that is here for you. It's also in the memo, and this was the analysis that the transportation department used to help answer the questions you asked as well. And that is all I have. I'm happy to take questions. We can also have transportation as well.
I think what we might do is, since most of the questions were focused in the transportation arena, it doesn't mean we won't need you back, but so stay close. But
Sure.
I think now we'll have transportation come up. Hi, Michael.
Good afternoon. Give me just a second here.
Sure, take your time.
So we put together a brief slideshow here just to kind of like walk through. We had 5 questions that we wanted to discuss a little bit again today with you, and we'll just walk through them quickly. And I think what we'll do is start with some of the easy ones first, particularly around some of the bicycle infrastructure related to the cycle track. So that is still in development. So the specific answer to that is it's likely to go at either Peace or West, obviously. There will be, it will be at a signal, and we'll make sure that that is designed accordingly so that we've got a very high quality crossing there, because that's a very busy street and because that's likely to be a very busy connection between 2 greenways at the north and south of downtown. We'll use things like high visibility markings. Of course, it'll be a traffic signal, signage. There is an opportunity on the west side of Harrington to use the refuge island there, so you sort of see how an illustration like that might work, and again, others. But again, this is very preliminary, and it'll be something that we'll work through with the design of. One thing I do want to bring to your attention, so we do have a project that is a streetscape project for Peace Street that ends just west of the railroad bridge there on Peace and extends back toward Cameron Village. That does not have any bicycle infrastructure associated with that due to the space concerns along that route. There are probably some alternative routes there that we can explore going forward, but I just wanted to bring that to your attention today.
Thank you.
Second question was about mobility infrastructure. Those are generally determined at the site planning level. So we will be looking at that as we get into site plan review once the project comes in for permitting. Next question dealt with what were we looking at in terms of traffic counts. So the counts that we have that I would say that we could base with some confidence on were counts that North Carolina Department of Transportation did back in 2011 prior to their Capitol Boulevard improvement plan. The 2011 counts on Capitol were right at 54,200 as an average daily total. It's a projection of, and usually we use about 1% a year, but a projection to close to 70,000 by 2035. P Street, on the other hand, is right about 24,800 today, with a growth going forward. We can share that with you on a chart if you're interested, but that's in rough terms kind of where we sit with that today. The next question we looked at was sort of about aggregate trip counts. Now, this is one, quite frankly, that given the sort of state of play out in the area right now is a little bit difficult to do. We've got a very active construction project between private development that's out there today, and the interchange at Peace and Capitol are still under construction. That's going to take a pretty significant reconfiguration as we come into completion on that. So how we actually derive data from that is going to be pretty difficult. But this, again, comes from the Envision tool that planning has. So when we look at this, we talk about an office and retail use about generating a net 273 trips new in the PM peak, 290 in the AM peak, and then a total kind of average daily total of about 8,400, 8,500 trips a day. Other question we had dealt with, what about levels of service that exist along Peace Street today? So I provide this for you just when we talk about levels of service, it can be a fairly abstract kind of approach. Basically, you're trying to see how much delay that you have at traffic signals, and I provide this illustration for you today just as what you would, when we talk about a level of service A, what that looks like. We talk about a level of service D, what that looks like. And again, just like grades in school, A is much better than F. Unfortunately, I was probably more toward the C's and D's side of things when I was in school, but again, level of service A is like much better. You would consider that to be free flow, much like you would see with the interstates or something like that. Level of service E would be something that you would assume to be, think of McDowell Street at Cabarrus in the morning as you come into town from the south side of town. It's very congested and we'll back up there sometimes. Just to remind you, per our street design manual, a level of service E is what we consider acceptable in an urban context. So here's a quick graphic, and it washes out a little bit in the screen, but it's a quick graphic of what you see at each of these intersections at the AM peak, and where you see all the boxes congregated. That would be P Street if it did not wash out. This is the PM peak. This is maybe a little bit better illustration for you as to what we would see in context. If you look at P Street at Glenwood, and I would refer you probably to the top line as the most illustrative line. That's based on some work that our staff has recently done to look about how to optimize signals in the area. We do have a level of service D at Glenwood and Peace today. For the rest of the quarter, though, you see a pretty good level of service, A's and B's and C's. So again, we feel pretty comfortable with how that operates. We do have some plans that we think we can do to help that level of service D at Peace, and will also help shorten the signal time there too, which would be a great improvement.
Can you talk a little bit about what those plans are?
So it would require us installing a double left turn from southbound Glenwood to eastbound Peace Street. So it may mean that we need to shorten part of that island that is there today, but it would, again, help move that and would considerably shorten the signal time on that. So again, we come back to what are the travel demand that we would have around the site here. Generally speaking, we're going to see probably the highest peaks if we use solely an office use to generate those trips. When we looked at this a little bit today, again with the Envision tool, the office, retail, residential had a similar number of trips, but it sort of smoothed the peak out. So we had a lower peak, but a fairly similar number of trips. The grid that we have today will be enhanced and extended because Johnson Street will now extend through to Capitol. That will help considerably in terms of just the kind of access around the site that you don't have in place today. So again, this illustration kind of helps you with that. What we don't know is how trips are going to redistribute based on that, in part because just how that area is under a state of construction and in a state of flux. People are going to tend to find different routes to what's most convenient. The building mix, the use, the access points for any new construction, for any new development will also have some influence on that as to just how the traffic network generally functions. Those are things that I don't think we can know until we get a little bit further along in the process. Some things that you may want to consider. So part of the way that we could get clarity on this would be if we had a traffic impact analysis available to us. Now, that's not something typically that we look at with the downtown zoning, but it is something that we might suggest or council might consider to get a little more clarity and to get a little bit more information to make some strong decisions, would be to request that at various dates in the process. Now, at the top, we sort of state the sort of current state of play, that we don't require that at the rezoning or the site plan approval process. If council wanted that information, they could request a TIA as a condition to the rezoning, but that's going to extend the zoning case and the time frame that we have on that. Then council might also consider some exemptions from the UDO and request that TIA requirement at the site plan level. That would give us a little bit more surety. We would then know what the building program is. We would also have known access points, and we would also have construction projects like the interchange project much, much further along, so we would have much more better data to kind of base those decisions on. That would be administrative, so just want to make sure that point's clear. Lastly, one thing I'd like for you to consider kind of external to this case today, we're seeing that we've got more cases like this where we have some special conditions. We're having rezonings come in that may have the downtown zoning, but they're more special conditions. They are abutting a neighborhood. They are in a very constrained site. Council may wish to consider a policy that does require TIA for some of those instances going forward, and I just leave that for your consideration. So if you have any questions, I'm very happy to entertain them.
Questions for Mr. Moore?
One specific one about the third option, which was the TIA at administrative site plan review. So I understand that, yes, the DOT project will be close to being completed. Other development projects in the area will be more close to being completed. Other street improvements, you mentioned West Johnson. I think that's already navigable. It may not be still a construction zone, but that TIA, just to help me understand, it would incorporate the trip impacts, obviously, of this case, of the, what I'll call the Publix development project. Would it incorporate other planned development in the vicinity?
We try to make sure that the TIA reflects what's sort of known at the time. So if we know that there are other components that are in the works or other rezonings that are out there, we try to make sure that that is taken into consideration as the TIA is prepared.
Okay. So obviously Kane has some other phases that they've been working on. Would those be incorporated into the TIA?
If we know about them and their consultants know about them, we would want to make sure that those are incorporated. It does have an impact, so.
Right. Yes. Right. And of course, Kane has a great reputation of bringing forward ideas that are real projects, not just theoretical, so I appreciate that. Okay. So in general terms, I just have a comment, and that is it's a big concern. This is a great location downtown to add density to the city of Raleigh. I think what we have to keep in mind that density is not an end in itself, but it's a goal for reaching, it's a way to reach our comp plan goals. So, more compact, walkable, mixed use, more transit friendly, more efficient, all those things. But density by itself isn't necessarily achieves those goals. And in this particular case, appreciate the work on dealing with the existing conditions related to existing traffic constraints here, conditions related to desire to have our downtown be a city downtown, not just for rich folks, but for a wide range of incomes. So what I want to say is It would be great if we could say, Kane and others, just bring forward projects that don't have any parking in them, because we're headed towards a transit future, but that's not the reality that we have to deal with. The developers here have requirements by their investors and their tenants to provide those inside the project parking spaces. So that's the reality they're dealing with. And so therefore, the reality we as a city have to deal with is we have to provide the vehicular infrastructure to deal with their reality. And so that's why doing a TIA in this area to make sure that we can maintain adequately performing street grid is so important, and that it really is the key to making sure that we balance the development intensity and trip generation with the infrastructure capacity we have in this area. So I just appreciate all the work that Kane's team has done to bring forward what looks like a great project that is attempting to address a lot of the comp plan goals in this area and provide a great project going forward. So I just look forward to working through the details.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. Any other questions for Mr. Moore?
Just in terms of the traffic impact analysis, are you saying conducting one as part of the rezoning case or as part of the site plan review? Which are you recommending?
That's council's option. If it's part of the zoning case, the zoning case extends. The site plan review we would have more knowns at that time. So,
but then we'd also have
fewer data.
We'd also have fewer options for doing anything about it. Is that right, or not necessarily?
So my thought process there is in terms of the scale of the project and the trip impacts that it generates. If we have a known project and we have a known process for evaluating the trips generated, and there's a condition that says that the applicant will adjust and mitigate to meet those minimally acceptable levels of service in the streets around their project, then that achieves my goals.
Okay, thanks. Okay, thank you, Mr. Moore.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Gaylor.
Yes, glad to be here again. Bonner Gaylord, representing Kane and Williams Building and Realty. And just to hit the traffic piece first, because we've been having lots of discussions with staff, and we do feel like we're happy to include as a condition that we will conduct a TIA if we're above the current zoning threshold run by Envision tomorrow at the time of site plan when we have more information. And at that time of site plan, we can run that TIA and then make improvements based on staff's analysis to make sure that the infrastructure is functioning commensurate with the city's goals. So we are happy to add that condition, do that investigation at site plan when we have much more information, right. And we can get a much better analysis.
I think that makes sense. To do it before then, we don't really know enough about what your project's going to entail. And it makes more sense to have more information at site plan for me.
Yes, and so we're happy to adjust the condition that staff is content with that makes that statement very clearly.
And can I just ask how many parking places you have planned right now for Phase 1, Phase 2, and Phase 3?
Phase 1 is, TJ needs some help here, is it?
Yes, TJ Behringer, also representing Kane and Williams Realty. Phase 1, you mean the Publix, or do you mean in this current project?
No,
in the Publix. There's about 220 spaces just for Publix, and then there's about 450, I think, maybe 500 spaces for the residents.
Okay.
And then
And public spaces as well.
yeah, public spaces, and also, some of the office workers will park there.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the second phase, there's about 700 spaces in that deck that is office, shared between office, residential, and retail public.
Okay, thank you.
And, we've heard from the Glenwood South Neighborhood Coalition that the parking is much needed in that area, and they're excited to receive it. So
Okay.
hopefully
thank
that'll be
you.
helpful.
So Bonner, are we finished with transportation questions? So I just want to commend your group and Mr. Kane for really looking at what's important to the citizens of Raleigh in our citizen survey, and you guys making it clear that affordability as a pro forma in the project didn't work, but that you understand how important it is for us to be able to answer the questions of affordability, and for you guys to be willing to make a $1 million contribution to that is outstanding. So all the groups should be commended for that. I think it's a great step forward. And so if you will let your team know that we are, as a council, I am grateful for that, very much so.
Well,
So
thank you for those kind words, and we're grateful to put that condition forward, and we recognize that there are impacts and responsibilities that we bear, and we want to be responsive and help improve our community. And truthfully, that money can go a lot further in other projects that don't have the extremely high construction costs that a tower like this would bring. So we're glad to offer it, and we're going to continue to work through with staff to make sure that we have the exact right mechanisms that would give everyone comfort with that everybody gets run over by a bus, that the money's still going to come in and going to be able to
And
be
I appreciate
delivered
you
on.
working with Robin and her team to make sure that everybody feels good about mitigating any kind of risk of something like that happening, and that y'all can get comfortable with it as a group, and the city council can get comfortable with legal advice of making sure that happens. So thanks very much with that.
Yes, and we've had continued discussions, and we'll get to a spot that works.
So can I just mention one more thing to you? So I like the Dillon very much, but over time, you realize, and I'm sure John does because I've called him several times, the parking deck has a lot of issues about lighting. So when we're looking at the next parking deck that's going to come with Smoky Hollow, should be able to mitigate as much of that lighting pollution as it relates to the street would be great. There's a way to look at that. I think one of the comments was that Citrix did a better job at trying to mitigate that somehow. And I'm not an engineer or a lighting engineer, so I don't know what those are. But if we could strive to try to find less light pollution in the area would be better.
Yes, and we agree, and we have added that condition to reference that project specifically. So we feel like we're at a spot that answers that question.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions from Mr. Gaylor?
Just one for staff, but not for the applicant.
Thank you. Thank you very
Okay,
much, Bonner.
Certainly.
So,
Which staff?
Michael,
Michael?
I just want to make sure I understand what the methodology that's going to be used for the TIA at site plan approval. Heard Bonner say envision tomorrow. Is that the methodology?
We'll work with them on to determine what works best. I can't tell you exactly what methodology we would use. I would have to defer our traffic engineering staff and let them see. But we'll work with them on an acceptable approach and make sure that we get something that's solid and reasonable and we can make good decisions from.
Okay. Yeah, I thought it would, TIA was
Right.
more on actual counts, but.
It is.
But obviously, if you got some future projects that are going to be accounted for, you got to do that.
Again, at site plan, we have a solid notion of what the building program is going to be, and it gives us much better decision-making data, so.
But in terms of future phases that are coming, you turn to envision tomorrow to estimate those.
Probably,
Okay.
yes.
All right, thanks.
Yeah.
So if I could, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I would just add also that those are under construction, so the staff knows exactly what we're building there and can include those in their analysis.
Okay, great, thanks.
So in my desire to move this forward, I want to just recap that the applicant has agreed to do a TIA in conjunction with our staff at the site plan level, and that they have listed many conditions we've discussed today that we are good with, and that we will report this out to council for the June 18th meeting. I'm sorry.
Let me make one clarification. We're happy to do the site plan, and what we had discussed with staff is if we go above what the current zoning is, that triggers the TIA. So they'll have a baseline of what they say Envision Tomorrow does, and then we probably will exceed that, but if we don't, then.
No. We want.
Okay, that's not-
We want to cap trips at the minimum acceptable level of service that is estimated by the TIA analysis.
Okay. Okay, so you're saying whether, no matter what we build, you'd like to see a TIA versus if we build something
The
above what
point
we
of the
could today.
TIA is to say, we want you to come up with whatever mitigations you have to in your project, either improving the grid, changing your mix of uses, making the building smaller, so that your trip generation will not trigger an unacceptable level service on the intersections around your project.
Okay. Yeah, we had been talking about it in terms of in excess of what's currently allowed, but if you're saying
No,
just
we-
regardless.
No, I've got to go back to my constituents and say, I promise you that P Street will still work when this project is built, and that means that we're going to use our staff's best engineering estimate of how to maintain an acceptable level of service on P Street.
Okay, all right, I get where you're coming from. Do we have any, I think we can do it
Do y'all
that way.
need to group for a
No,
minute?
I think we can do it. We just, I mean, that'll introduce a delay that may or may not be relevant, but to give everybody comfort, we're happy to do that.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
All right, certainly.
So I'm going to try to recap this again. So we are going to report out to the council meeting for June 18th, Z319, with the conversation at a TIA at site plan, and with the other things that were listed in the conditions. And if everybody agrees, that's my motion. I need a second.
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? So we'll push this one out to June 18th, to the council.
Thank you all.
Thank you. The next one is Z 2518, 415 Leadmine Road. If we could have staff first. Hello.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So this rezoning request was referred to the committee in May. It's, excuse me, a request to rezone about 11 acres of land right across the street from Crabtree Valley Mall. Planning Commission had recommended approval, as had the Northwest CAC. I'm going to provide just a quick overview. You've seen this presentation before, but just a refresher. And then I know there will be a little bit of discussion about stormwater and perhaps some other issues. So just to look at the site itself, again, obviously the mall is the anchor of this district. Site just across Glenwood Avenue from the mall, currently occupied by some apartment buildings that would be redeveloped as part of this project. So a couple of views of, just for orientation's sake, of the site itself, looking along Glenwood Avenue, a little bit of slope there where the site is. And this is looking back south. The conditions, just to hit the highlights there, and I'll show a table comparing this to the current conditions. There are some limits on density, 350 dwelling units, limits on commercial uses. That's probably the largest change, reduction in the amount of retail that would be permitted. Also, some requirements for some bicycle pedestrian connections through the site down to Glenwood Avenue. And I have a quick exhibit that illustrates what those look like. So it spells out that there would be one connection coming down from the Marriott Drive right away, bisecting the site down to Glenwood Avenue, and then a second connection here on the northwest corner of the site. So a couple ways to provide a little bit more pedestrian connectivity through this area. The comparison again, current and proposed. So right now, zone CX12, although effectively it's 9 stories per condition, this would reduce that height to 7 stories. But the changes are in the details of the conditions. So it would permit more residential units than is currently the case. Currently 16 per acre or 175 total. So that would double with this rezoning. And then on the flip side, would reduce the retail entitlement significantly from 125,000 to 10,000, if that's included. So future land use map designates this as community mixed use. It's consistent with that designation. The land use map here in this area clearly has a transition from the most intense retail mixed-use environment at the mall itself, transitioning down as it goes northward on this map. You can see the office and residential a little bit further north and down to residential. Also, in terms of urban form, does expect a certain amount of form that's provided with the conditions that they've included as part of this request. There's some area plan guidance, the Crabtree area plan done several years back. There's some images that illustrate some of the concepts. The largest one that's relevant to this particular rezoning is the idea of some additional pedestrian connections, a pedestrian network in that area, including, ideally, according to the plan, a grade separated crossing of Glenwood Avenue. And that, in fact, led to the one point of inconsistency with this request and the comprehensive plan. The existing zoning conditions do require a grade separated path if retail is included, and it does have a large retail entitlement. So that path is not included as part of this rezoning request. It does have those, at least the connections through the site, which do help with pedestrian circulation in the area. But nonetheless, consistent with the future land use map, consistent overall with a number of policies regarding zoning for housing, compact development, and so on. So I know that the applicant has talked with our stormwater staff about potential revisions to conditions about stormwater on the site. They have not provided those yet officially. There is still the pending public hearing. I know they've had some draft language, which I'll let the applicant discuss because we haven't received anything official yet, but I know that there's some willingness to address that issue. Stormwater is here as well and may have some comments about that. But before we get to that, happy to take any questions that y'all have about the case in general.
Questions?
I had one. There was gotta find it again. There was some a bill to on Marriott Drive.
0 to 50.
What are we trying to accomplish there?
Some urban form consistency with respect to that.
So just pulling whatever the buildings are up to Marriott Drive.
Right.
Okay.
Or 0 to 50, there's some flexibility.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much. So if we could have the applicant next. Elizabeth.
Madam Chair and council members, Beth Trejos, Nelson Mullins here today on behalf of 2652 LLC, which is an entity owned by Coterides Development. I've got with me Pete Coterides and Ryan Hambleton with Coterides Development, as well as Josh Ranke with Ramey Kemp, who's the traffic engineer. And I've got a little PowerPoint, if I can figure out how to get to it. I will pull it up real quick. Yeah, and okay. So I'll skip over the parts that you've heard already. I thank Jason for the
We'd
wonderful,
love that.
wonderful job he has done working with us throughout this process and here today as well. As Jason indicated, there are, in our conditions, a number of iterations of uses that could be permitted. And sort of the genesis of that was a desire to accommodate the mixed-use element of the comp plan. Coterides is primarily an apartment developer, and their desire is to build apartments here. And so, we included these options that would create a sliding scale to allow some office or retail mixed use or hotel to accommodate that mixed use component in the comp plan. But, we sort of look to you as to your interest in having that mix of uses on this site or viewing the area more largely as having a mix of uses. We would like the opportunity to have one mixed use building, so some small amount of retail and or office. But this sort of illustrates for you in graphic form what the conditions allow in terms of the mix of uses. I know we have gotten a lot of questions as we have moved through this process about how do you get into the existing Northampton apartments. There are on this site apartments that were built like in the, I'm going to guess, late 60s that are largely dilapidated. We've heard from several folks, how do you access the site? There's this slide illustrates the access points, one across from North Hills, which is at a light, and I think this next slide shows you a little bit more closely. So this is a lighted access across from North Hills. Then there are 2 access points here on Marriott/Charles Drive that will allow access and connection. We also know that the comp plan has a desire for pedestrian access, and we think that makes sense in this area, which is actually very transit friendly, with the bus transfer station at the mall. And so we sought to accommodate those by providing 2 pedestrian access points. The first is one that's kind of existing here. If you go on the site today, you can kind of see a little trail through the woods to get down to the sidewalk that runs along Glenwood. And you can see a little bit of the sidewalk outside of the trees here, and you can't quite see it down there, but there is sidewalk all along Glenwood Avenue here. So because this is existing and people are using it, we thought it would be good to maintain that, improve it. It's very steep, so it would require steps. So recognizing that there might be folks that would not want to use the steps, we thought we ought to provide a second pedestrian access point, and that's this point, which may go like this, but will go through the site using the passageway standards in the code, so that it is an attractive place to walk. And it will have the zigzag sidewalks so that you could get a wheelchair, for instance, through that pedestrian access.
Question there.
Yes,
So-
sir.
So where the ADA compliant path terminates at Glenwood Avenue, then what happens?
So you can get on the sidewalk wherever it terminates, and you can either go here.
So you're adding sidewalks on Glenwood?
No, sir, there are existing sidewalks. Yes.
They're already down there.
Yep.
All right, thanks.
So then you walk here and cross at the Marriott, and using the measuring tool in IMAPs, I just measured the distances. And so if you come down this path and you walk, up to the Marriott crossing, across the street, and to the bus stop, it's about a half mile. If you come down this way, and walk over to the intersection, you go up, cross lead mine, go to the Greenway access point, and come over. So you go under Glenwood Avenue using the Greenway to the transit stop. It's about a mile. So those are both very walkable from this location. And my office is in Glen Lake, so very near here. And I know that Highwoods is building a new office building in Glen Lake right now, and there's an office building under construction on Creedmoor Road. So there is a lot of demand in this employment center for housing. And my assistant actually lives in one of the apartment complexes off of Creedmoor Road, and she said, it's hard to get in. So having additional apartments here, we think would be a benefit. Now, how do I make that go away? Undo. And I apparently scrawled a lot, so.
He'll help you.
Please do. Oh, thank you so much. As Jason indicated, we have been working with stormwater staff relative to a new condition. We're still working on the language, but we are committing to detain the 2, 10, 25, 50, and 100-year storms on the site. And our plan for stormwater, I guess maybe I should go back one more. Our plan is, currently there's, in the 60s, there was no stormwater regulations, so stormwater sort of sheet flows down towards Glenwood Avenue. The plan here is to take the stormwater away from the mall this way, so that what is existing going across the street will now not go that way. So we see what we're proposing as providing a stormwater benefit to a sensitive area at the mall. In addition, we would say to you that we are providing housing in an area that is already utilized for apartments and that is not adjacent to neighborhoods that might object to density. It is in an area that the comprehensive plan indicates should be dense. It has easy access to transit, and we think good pedestrian access, utilizing the existing infrastructure and what we would install on our site. And then, of course, there will be additional tax revenue generated by the redevelopment of the site. we have all of our group here. We are happy to talk with you. We want to have a dialogue with you. And our hope is that you will agree with the CAC and the Planning Commission and that you will recommend approval of our proposal.
So thank you. Mr. Thompson, I think you have some questions.
Yes, sure. So, Beth, thank you and Pete for meeting me over at the site. So I will say to you that I'm not against the development of this property. It's just the way it's proposed right now, it's not acceptable. I mean, the folks that I represent in North Raleigh, the tens of thousands of people that come down Lead Mine Road every day, it would be a total disservice if we approve this plan as is presented. So we don't have enough time today to get this worked out, but I will tell you some things that I'm concerned about that we need to work on between now and whenever we meet again to go over that. And it's, first of all, if my constituents look at this deal, rezoning, what's already on the property versus what they're getting now, that's not a good deal. It's not a good trade. So to improve zoning, to get a rezoning, there should be improvements to the city, benefits from it. So the biggest benefit that I guess you're giving up a lot of retail, but you're also not having to do a pedestrian bridge across Glenwood Avenue that's worth millions of dollars that would cost. You didn't mention that to us, but Jason did. But I mean, that's the truth. That's not proposed at all. I guess, so, you know, the density is a really concern to me because right now you can do currently 175 apartments, 125,000 square foot of retail if you do the bridge. What you're proposing now is no bridge, 350 apartments, 10,000 square feet of retail, or 260 apartments, 45,000 feet of office, and 10,000 feet of retail, something like that, and still no pedestrian bridge. So you're going, currently, you can build 175 units on the property, which is R16. I guess when you ask for the rezoning, well, why don't we double it? Because that's exactly what you did. From 175 to 350, you went from R16 to R32. There is nowhere around there that's R32. It's just way too much. I'm not totally against retail there. It's not a great retail site, so I think your amount of retail would be okay. And office, I still think that's a lot of office, depending on the apartment mix that you come back with. I would be open to listening to some of that. The traffic there right now is, the intersections there are level F. Mm-hmm. Right now you have, I think you told me 20 units in that apartment complex that's occupied. It's still an F. Mm-hmm. Can we imagine what it would be like with 350 occupied apartments? I don't know if we could get down to a level Z, but I mean, that's about where it would be. So concerned about transportation question, Jason or Michael? Yes. Yeah. So, and we talked about this. Going north on Lead Mine from Glenwood, would it be possible to prohibit a left turn going into where they're proposing to have the main entrance?
So they did a TIA as a part of the rezoning and analyzed two different scenarios for that access. Can I pull up a map?
Yeah, a map is good.
Jason, is this?
There you go.
I will use this one.
Yeah.
So at this traffic signal here, at opposite North Hills Drive, they analyzed two different scenarios, one of which would have been a full movement signal, which I believe is what's already in place. The other would be to change this to a right in, right out. So there'd be no left in or lefts out in that. There was a minor difference in the outcome of that. And basically the conclusion of our TA review was that we need to, at a site plan, basically rerun that analysis with the full full actual building program, not the theoretical maximums, look at what NCDOT's project planning might be doing in that area and decide if it should be right in, right out, or full movement, and based on what works best, not knowing what the outcome would be at this point.
I would say to you that that would be fine to look at that, but I can tell you, if you're taking a left on at that intersection with North Hills to get in there, because there's a very short distance between Glenwood Avenue and North Hills Drive.
Yes.
It would be backed up to the belt line. It's already backed up a lot of times. If folks are waiting, because that's a short left-hand lane to get in the turn signal, I'd much prefer to go up to Marriott Drive for the main entrance here. And I think that would be better. Make that other one a right in, right out, where the light is. And then they also have the option of going up to Charles Drive and coming around that way. So they've got two, and that would get more traffic up the hill before we start backing folks up at Crabtree.
How would you turn left from North Hills onto Leadmine then, if it was right in, right out?
I think in this analyzed scenario, North Hills itself wouldn't have changed. There would still been a left off of North Hills onto Leadmine as there currently is. It would have been, their access would have been restricted.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, storm drainage. That's,
From stormwater?
yeah,
Thank
so, in your write-up, there's a lot of language, Wayne, about, and like Beth pointed out, going in the western part of the site is very problematic. Of course, it floods over there, so trying to reroute it. But where is it going to go? Tell us. I know there's some pipes that go underneath Leadmine, I believe.
Yes, sir.
Do we know the size of that? Could that handle this?
We do know the size of that, but that's a capacity concern as well. So the language we've talked about is to look at controlling the peak discharge to pre-development at all points of discharge of that site, sir.
Yeah. So can we be working on that? 'Cause that's a concern of everybody that goes through Crabtree, because it floods.
Yes, sir. We know that, and we are working with staff to create language that will address that issue. If I...
I've got a few more, but
Okay,
if you want to
okay.
go ahead
No,
and talk
you go
about
ahead. You go
stormwater.
ahead.
I'm sorry,
You go
stormwater?
ahead. That was it on
Oh,
stormwater.
okay. I guess the other thing is about your conditional uses. It's a very limited list.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to at least include all the conditional uses that's on the property now.
Okay, so you'd like us to broaden?
Yes.
Okay.
And Robin, a question for you. Is it permissible to prohibit tattoo businesses?
However, that they are classified under the UDO, and I'm not sure.
Like an adult establishment, or since only adult can get tattoos, I think?
Adult establishment is called out separately. I'm not sure where tattoo parlors are. I think there should be a way to do it. It's probably caught in a larger use, and you could say, retail establishments except for the following or something like that. I'm sure that's probably okay with you, Beth. Yeah, she can.
So
We just have to locate where it is in the UDO and then pull it out like that.
Would you work with her on that? Because I know the apartments that y'all are going to do are going to be nice. You might have families in there, and you may sell off the retail piece. And if you do that, you don't have any control over what goes in there. So I'd like to see if we could put that in there too.
We will look at that.
Mr. Thompson, you have some other
Okay.
items?
We found it. It's 6.4.9, personal service, and a subset of that is called tattoos and body piercing, unless you want to leave in the body piercing.
Both of them be fine with me. Yeah. Okay.
I still think it's the adult thing.
The other thing I would like for you to look at would be the handicap accessibility to get to Glenwood. I believe it should be on the west end of the site because it's closer toward the crossing that goes over from Marriott, by the Marriott Hotel across there, which is more well-defined. There's a traffic button there for folks to cross over. Trying to have them come down further down and go along Glenwood when the cars are going 45, 50 miles an hour, a lot of trucks on that road, handicapped people, I would not, I think that's not a great idea to have them travel that far. So maybe flip-flop it.
We will definitely look at that. I think there was a topography issue.
Well, I'm
that
sure it's a little
informed the-
challenging, because I know it's steep back there, but you could do switchbacks, and I think you could,
We will-
if you
we
would
will
have
s-
your engineers look at that.
We will certainly look at that.
Okay.
And we were also balancing, which is the best way to cross. Would it be better to go to the Greenway and then go underneath, or cross Marriott? But we will look more carefully at that.
I'm not handicapped, and I wouldn't hardly cross over down there at Glenwood and Lead Mine right now. It's not well marked. It's, to get to the Greenway is very dangerous.
Busy intersection, right?
Yes.
Go ahead.
I'm unclear about tree conservation. We have a lot of nice trees along Glenwood Avenue and North Hills, and I was wondering what that would look like after.
Sure. We worked with the tree conservation staff. Actually, Jason facilitated a meeting with Chris Crum. So we committed that there would be 12,000 square feet of tree conservation along Glenwood Avenue. We will be interrupting the trees at some point there to provide the pedestrian access points. And so that's the reason we worded the language that way, because we weren't exactly sure where they would go, as well as the associated stormwater improvements. So that was the reason.
So, question about that. So where did you come up with the 12,000 feet? What's the linear footage along Glenwood?
I don't, off the top of my head, know the linear footage along Glenwood, but we were looking at that information in our discussions with Chris.
Well, I share your concerns, because if it's 500 feet or greater, you're only talking about maybe 25 feet from Glenwood. There's a lot of nice trees up there that, so let's see about the linear footage, what that would be, so we can make sure that we have adequate coverage there. And I think some of that's also you had right up in there about, you'd be screening your parking, from that, and that would be a good screen that already exists.
Right, and the expectation is there's not going to be a lot of, disruption of that area given the steep slopes. It's just, dealing with the ordinance provisions relative to, how you come through with your access points was the challenge.
I get that part of it. I know you have to do that. That's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
So it sounds like to me, Dickie, just from my observation of what's transpiring here, it sounds like you have a little more work to do with the district rep for the district. And this will be our last Growth and Natural Resources meeting until August. So might I suggest that we choose a date to return this to the council, and then for a date certain, and then we can move it back to Growth and Natural Resources if we need to. So with that said, what do you think about either September 3rd or September 17th? What would work better for you and the applicant?
I mean, we will be available either one of those days.
For the 17th.
So why don't we say that we'll move this out as date certain for September 17th to the full council?
Okay.
I just have one more comment.
Well, and I'd like to make a few as well.
Okay, sure.
Okay, the only comment I have is that, and I have the most tremendous respect for Mr. Thompson, but I'm not entirely sure I agree with prohibiting the tattoo parlors. Or the piercing.
Okay.
But
Thank you
I'm
for
not
that,
sure,
Mr. Cox.
I'm not sure they're prohibited at the mall, and, so.
Well, that's all you all have until September the 17th.
We have some time to
Just
think
try to
about
work
it.
through some of that. Mr. Stevenson?
Okay, a few comments. First one, since we have this drawing up here, I'll start with transportation. There's a blue dotted line that extends Marriott on over to the Marriott's entrance off of Glenwood. What's the status of that? Obviously, from a traffic standpoint, that's another way in and out of your site that could take trips off of the Glenwood Lead Mine intersection.
That's right.
So it seems like you'd be chomping at the bit to get that built.
So it's on property we don't own.
Yeah.
And what we've heard through the grapevine, I've had no discussions with the folks at the Marriott, but we have heard that there's not a pressing interest from them to make the connection. The road is existing and ready to be connected.
Yeah.
It just dead ends currently.
It
So
does.
again, back to the point that Counselor Thompson is making, that intersection at Lead Mine and Glenwood is already level of service of F. This is an opportunity for people to get in and out of this site and get up Lead Mine and completely miss that intersection. It seems like it's a tremendous opportunity to improve the performance of the intersection there and help us all feel like adding any additional density here is a great idea instead of a real questionable one. In that same mode, on page 21 of the staff report, it says, under TIA review, it says additional analysis and discussion are anticipated at administrative site plan review stage of development to how the actual proposed development compares to the existing situation. And, if it's already level of service F, maybe that's, won't add much, but it seems like if staff is already going to do some additional analysis, the sooner that gets done, the more we'll know what the impacts in the AM and PM peak will be in and out of this site. So it just seems like there's going to be some comparison of proposed with existing. That would be good to have sooner rather than later. It would be moving on.
Hold on just a moment.
I think I'm not sure if that was a request. That there was a TIA,
Okay.
and the result of that TIA is that there's a lot of congestion here, and that compared to the existing zoning, this rezoning would
Yeah, see, that doesn't-
significantly change that.
Yeah, see, but that doesn't really help us here because what we're dealing with is the existing bad conditions versus
Yes.
the
Well, and-
proposed conditions on the table. And I think adopting the concept that, well, this is less intense than the other ignores the fact that there was a pedestrian bridge. It was a significant component of it, giving other mobility options than getting in your car. So I'm saying that, well, it just doesn't seem like the TIA that says we're going to compare this with the existing entitlement without taking into account, unless they build a bridge, the entire retail piece is never going to get built. Really doesn't get us far to understanding what the real impacts of their proposed project will be on the real F intersection.
Right. I agree, and that's the purpose of that statement in the TIA review was to basically say that they would be required to do another TIA at site plan to set what their access patterns would be, what any mitigations they might need, and that would be built on their actual building program and not the
Excellent.
theoretical maximum.
So-
Theoretical maximums.
So now, deck screening, there's an item on page 16 of the staff review of the comp plan policies, and it says where feasible, parking structures should be aligned with active and visually attractive uses to lessen their impact. And the comment that staff made on your request is the request addresses the location and design of the deck structure by saying that it will not be visible from Glenwood or Lead Mine, or that it will be finished with the same materials as the primary building. So we could end up with a real bare concrete building with no light screening on Marriott Drive. Is that what I'm hearing?
No, we have a condition about,
The materials of the buildings.
yeah, we have screening or similar materials to the building. It's a condition in the zoning case.
That's number 5.
Yeah.
Okay. But so what about light trespass? Obviously, you've been hearing in just about every recent case that's in an urban context that light trespass from a parking deck right next to residential is, it's a big concern.
Good point. I didn't see that in there either. I didn't.
So we can certainly have full cutoff shielding on the lights.
Yeah.
This is a little bit different in that the surrounding land uses are more institutional than typical
Of course, I'm talking
residential.
about your proposed apartments having to deal with that as well.
And we can certainly look at full cutoff shielding for the lights. Obviously, they're incented to make this attractive for their residents, and we can look at that as we're looking at the rest of these comments.
So my experience is full cutoff is not a term of art, that actually keeps direct beam from trespassing into people's bedroom windows. So if you want to talk some more about what actually does that, that'd be great too.
Okay, I would very much like to talk to you
Okay.
about that.
Last item is, we just had a discussion with the previous applicant about providing a certain level of affordable housing consideration in their project. Obviously, we've unanimously changed our text to allow these conditions. We've unanimously agreed on some guidelines to make that offer more predictable. I'm just wondering where we are on that.
So that was put in place after we filed our zoning case last year, but we are aware of them. In the private sector, it does create some issues in terms of financing.
Right.
But what I would tell you is that Coterides has some existing apartment complexes in the community that are more affordable. And so I would share with you that they have 3 existing apartment complexes in Raleigh where the rents range from $935 to $1,475 as a high. And those are, studios, 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, in terms of the whole range. And that is on the more affordable end. And while it would be difficult for us to commit to that as a condition because of financing, you can see what we're doing in the community, and we would plan to do something similar here. And I should tell you, there's also a Durham project as well. But.
Well, I appreciate that, and because every little bit helps. The fact is that we've gone to the taxpayers and say we're going to dedicate a penny to doing $6 million worth of affordable, getting ready to do an affordable housing bond, hopefully next spring. And the fact is that we're losing more affordable units every year than we're gaining, and so the problem's not getting better. That's the reason why we said we're going to ask projects that provide a significant number of new units to help us be part of the solution, have some skin in the game. So I hope that you will, that I can have an opportunity to talk with you more about that as well.
We'd definitely like to follow up with you. Just if I may, a little bit about the thought process when we were bringing this forward. In the comprehensive plan does encourage density and intensity here, and we envisioned doing away with a significant amount of retail. We recognize that retail does come with a bridge requirement, which as you say is probably millions of dollars that is not affordable by this piece of property. I think that's why it hasn't developed already. I think that I don't see an opportunity in which that would actually be constructed as a part of this project. We did offer to the city to make available an easement for the bridge if it were to ever come to fruition, but the staff response was, well, we don't even know, essentially leave that out. But we are willing to do that if that is something that you desire. In terms of impact on traffic, we recognize that this is a very difficult area, and we as a site are not situated in a way to provide significant improvements. So what we looked, and the staff looked very carefully at what we were proposing from a traffic perspective, and the result is that what is being added as a part of this project is so minimal in terms of the larger traffic that the impact in the AM peak, for instance, is 1 second of delay. That's the impact of what we're proposing in the AM peak hours. But we will sharpen our pencils and look at that. In terms of the urban form, we were trying to create a circumstance in which we would be focusing our project on Marriott Drive, which we see as a primary entrance. And so we were trying to create that urban feel that's commensurate with what the land use plan recommends for this area. So it was a thoughtful process in terms of design. And we appreciate your comments, and we will sit down with all of these and look forward to the opportunities to follow up with Mr. Thompson and Mr. Stevenson and others. If you would like to hear from us, we would love to talk to you. So I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Beth. So we are now going to move to item Z 3618. This is the West Martin Street.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
That is correct. The case right now is Z-36-18 at West Martin Street, just about a block and a half southwest of where we are right now. It is a request to rezone about 1 acre from downtown mixed use with a 5-story height and a shopfront frontage to downtown mixed use with a 12-story height limit, shopfront frontage and conditions. And it did receive votes of approval from the CAC and the Planning Commission. You can see it is in the Depot Historic District, or Warehouse District as it's called, right nearby. It has 2 buildings on 1 parcel. Here you can see it from the corner of Martin Street. This is from the interior of Martin Street, the corner of the alley that runs beside it, Commerce Place. And this is the rear of the site. And it does extend through the whole block with this access area here. All right, so the request would increase the entitlement on the site by about double. And the future land use map here is community mixed use. It is consistent with the future land use map due to some zoning conditions that restrict the allowed uses to make the downtown mixed use zoning conform to the use recommendations of community mixed use. It's also consistent with the urban form map designation of downtown due to the shopfront frontage that's been requested. There are a number of conditions. As I mentioned, there are some uses that are prohibited to bring it in line with the community mixed use designation. And then the remaining conditions have a lot to do with the historic resources on the site. It is in the Depot Historic District. Both of the structures on the site are contributing historic resources to the Depot Historic District. The conditions would require that both of those structures to be retained through any future construction. If they were damaged through accident or disaster, that new construction in their place would have to be matching in materials, and that new construction on other portions of the site would also have to be matching in materials, and that new construction within the footprint of the existing buildings would also be reviewed by the Certificate of Appropriateness Committee of the Raleigh Historic Developments Commission. That does not require approval by the COA committee, only review. So that would, any notes from the COA committee would not be binding on a site review. The other thing to note here is that there's a maximum height above the existing, or in the footprint of the existing structures, of 5 stories, as opposed to the requested zoning height of 12 stories. This image was shown during the regular city council meeting. I think there may have been a little bit of confusion about the intent of this image. This is not meant to show the zoning condition that requires the 5-story height limit. The intent of this image is actually to respond to some questions that were raised by the Historic Development Commission and the Planning Commission about the potential for a step back from West Martin Street above the existing buildings. So the case as it's constructed now would allow new construction above the existing buildings, and does not require any setback for that new construction. And so that could mean that there could be an addition built on top of the existing buildings that is essentially flush to West Martin Street. The applicant has stated that they would rely on the Secretary of the Interior standards for construction of an addition above the existing buildings in order to receive the federal tax benefits that accrue with that. That is not something that is required by zoning condition. And so this image was intended to show a way both that step back could be calculated in order to reduce the visibility of an addition from the opposite side of West Martin Street, as well as to show the type of language that could be used to formulate that condition, which would be enforceable because it is similar to existing language that we already have in the Unified Development Ordinance. So really the intent of this was to enable that conversation by showing that type of condition is entirely possible. This is a map of the Depot Historic District, so you can see the site there is within the district. Quite a few policies that are consistent. The request is also consistent overall with the comprehensive plan. There are some inconsistent policies related to the 12-story height, though not being allowed in the front portion of the site where the existing buildings are is still out of character with the Depot Historic District, and so is inconsistent with those policies. All right. And I'll be happy to take any questions.
Questions? No questions?
Not for staff.
Okay, thank you. Applicant?
Good afternoon. My name is Amy Bullington. I'm with Clearscapes. I'm here with Fred Belladin, also with Clearscapes, on behalf of the applicant, which is 4DH Partnership. So I'd like to just go through briefly and talk about the zoning conditions we have on this case. There are quite a few, and I think really going through those will highlight the public benefit that the applicant is prepared to offer as part of this case. So the first thing that was hit on is that the existing buildings that are on the site, which are contributing structures to the Depot National Register Historic District, would be preserved as part of the conditions of this. You can see on the map, what the Depot District is. Really what we call it now is the Warehouse District. And we've all seen that the destination this has become, especially over the last few years. If you walk through the heart of the district on West Martin Street, where these buildings are, I would say to you that feels like Raleigh, especially if you go down there during First Friday. You can see all the activity and everything that's going on here. So as part of this case, those buildings, an important part of that character, would be preserved. Again, highlighting some historic images of this area, and you can see towards the center of the screen the properties that we're talking about, the buildings here, in adjacency to the historic Depot building. Also looking at the historic Union Station building, and then the former Dillon Warehouse site. So again, the heart of this warehouse district. One more historic slide, again highlighting the historic buildings and the alleyway between the two buildings, which is really a unique part of this district, still there today and would be preserved as part of this zoning condition. So just to sum up these conditions, I would say in the face of all the development pressures that are in this area, the owners are committed to preserving a significant amount of the fabric of the warehouse district, important parts of this really vibrant district, and I would say important parts of what makes downtown Raleigh as a whole feel unique. All right, moving on to some more conditions. One that's been hit on is that the maximum height within the footprint of the existing structures would be limited to 5 stories. Which is the current zoning entitlement, and any additional stories over those buildings. You can see the blue line here, which is that 123 feet of the right-of-way, essentially the footprint of the existing buildings. That would be subject to review by the Certificate of Appropriateness Committee, which is part of the RHDC. Another condition here that any exterior materials that were part of the construction would have to be consistent with those in the district. And again, these conditions are just underscoring the owner's commitment to preserving the unique character of this district. You also see a few use restrictions here, and these echo what were heard at community meetings in response to what the neighbors said they would like to see.
So Amy, would you define
Sure.
social services uses?
I am not sure where that is in the UDO. I'm assuming that's a specific use designation. Yeah. Thank you, John.
Social service uses, the 2 primary uses that are listed under that category are basically group homes. So group housing facilities for those that require additional medical or social services care.
Thank you.
Can we actually prohibit that?
That's what the condition does, yes.
And as I stated, those 2 conditions were in response to community meetings that were held during the process to get to this point. So when we talk about, we've talked about a goal of having consistency with the historic character, and how do we do that? One thing that we look at all the time as architects who do this work is the Secretary's standards for rehabilitation that are developed by the U.S. Department of the Interior. You can see them here. There's 10 of them. One thing to point out is that these aren't specific regulations, but they're guiding principles. And the acknowledgement here is that every historic property is unique, and so it requires a thoughtful approach that's really responding to its unique context. So finally, the last 3 zoning conditions you see here, these again continue to reflect what the owners heard from neighbors at the community meetings that have been held over the last 7 months. And these conditions underscore the commitment from the owners to not only work to preserve the unique character of the warehouse district that we've talked about, but to also create quality public space. So you can see here, condition number 9 saying that 50% of the required outdoor amenity area will be open to the public. And part of the intent there is to continue to provide the opportunity for people to come through that really unique alley between the 2 buildings and be in a public outdoor space that's really at the heart of the warehouse district. So with any project, like you've heard today, it's always a balance of what can be seen as competing priorities. And so I want to say that the 10 zoning conditions we've just gone through demonstrate the owner's shared commitment to the city's values of preserving unique historic resources and creating quality public space. The proposed rezoning is a balance of upholding these values while also acknowledging that this area, the warehouse district, is not going to remain completely unchanged. Not only are there real development pressures here, but there's other important goals the city has identified, such as increasing density around transit hubs such as Union Station and the future Russ Bus site. So I would put forth that this rezoning really strikes a balance between many of those priorities, and I'd ask you to consider the significant public benefit that it represents. We really welcome the opportunity to be here to answer any questions and engage in further conversation.
Questions for the applicant?
Sure. Historic preservation.
Yes.
Can you go back to your section diagram? So
This one?
that was it, right there. So can you point on there where the existing historic buildings are?
So this is the existing historic building.
Okay. And where would be your request to add up to 5 stories total in that area?
So this is an early diagram that did not reflect that, but it would be in this zone.
So it would be another 3 floors, front wall to back wall.
On the historic space.
In that section diagram, it would be all the way from West Martin to the...
So our intent would be to follow the Secretary of the Interior's guidelines, which would have a setback from Martin Street in order to preserve the integrity of the historic facades.
Okay. So in the staff report, they referenced the RHDC letter that's just been handed out and says the RHDC is still concerned that comments produced during a review by the COA committee of RHDC cannot be enforced during site plan review. And I guess somewhere in the staff presentation I heard reference to a covenant as presumably the way that you would attempt to enforce the RHDC's interpretation of the Secretary of Interior standards.
The covenant, I think, is a separate condition. Is that correct? Referenced in the staff report?
I'd have to, can you specify the part of the staff report where it mentions this covenant?
What was in your presentation?
I don't believe I mentioned.
A covenant?
It was a zoning condition could be used to achieve a step back, and the purpose of the image was to show how that zoning condition could be constructed.
Okay. So somewhere in the conversations with the applicant previous, there's been the discussion that the way that the interpretation of the RHDC COA committee would be enforced would be through a covenant outside of this process.
Yeah, to give you a little bit of background about that conversation, when the case was first submitted, the applicant had a condition that required new construction above the existing buildings to follow the Secretary of the Interior standards.
Right, okay.
And when we shared that with Development Services staff, what they said was Development Services staff are not qualified to review the Secretary of the Interior standards. they're qualified to review our Unified Development Ordinance. And so that's not an appropriate use of that staff. And so then the applicant said, that's fine, we can have the Certificate of Appropriateness Committee review it, because they do have the expertise to review something very similar to the Secretary of the Interior standards, which is our City of Raleigh Design Guidelines for Historic Districts. And when we received that condition, we shared that with the City Attorney's Office, and the City Attorney told us that the approval of a site review by the Certificate of Appropriateness Committee would be exceeding the statutory authority granted to the Raleigh Historic Developments Commission by the General Assembly, and therefore approval could not be required for a site review, for COA review. It had to be just that they review and provide comments to the Development Services site reviewer.
Okay. So,
Oh, and I'm sorry, and the covenant part was that the Historic Development Commission then said, well, could the applicant offer a covenant that would require Certificate of Appropriateness Committee approval?
So, Ms. Attorney, can you,
I don't know where that, I mean, that wasn't my answer. I think that what we had talked about was having the staff take, here. Mr. Stevenson and I had talked about, where is it? Having where they would go to the historic, the planning department's historic division staff, have them review it for their, for compliance, if the applicant would agree to that. That exterior improvements would comply with the Secretary's standards, and that should be determined by the staff, and that would be a condition of site plan approval. That would be one way you could do it, if they would have consent to that, I think.
So in the backup material on page 5, it does refer to a covenant.
I thought I saw it somewhere too.
yeah, it's in here.
Update from March 28th, according to the offered conditions, a covenant must be recorded to require new construction above existing structure to undergo a review by the Raleigh Historic Development Commission.
So the point I'm getting around to is I agree with you completely. This is an important historic preservation opportunity here, but it's also a valuable redevelopment opportunities. But so our interest in this in particular, as far as I'm concerned, is to make sure that what you do within the footprint of the historic structures is in compliance. And so the best way that I know of to make that happen is to make that not a review outside of this zoning condition, but to actually make it a zoning condition in this case. And I've expressed that to some of the development folks yesterday and asked them to get together with the city attorney. So let me just do one thing now, and that is to and so what I think I heard the city attorney say is just, again, reference the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation, right?
Sure.
And on the same page as the standards, there's a reference to the guidelines for rehabbing buildings. And I guess I need to pass this up to you to pass that up there for her to look at.
Yeah.
Because there are some specific references to doing additions on top of historic buildings. And so if you look at that highlighted sections on the, I guess it's essentially the third page, it says guidance should be applied to help design a compatible new addition that will meet the Secretary of Interior standards. And then down there under designing compatible rooftop additions, it says a rooftop addition is generally not appropriate for 1, 2, or 3-story buildings. And then further down, it says generally a rooftop addition should not be more than 1 story in height. And so I'm just curious how we can consider an addition, a condition here that's going to say, yes, we will comply with the standards and the associated guidelines for rooftop additions that essentially say generally you wouldn't do it on top of a 2-story building, and even if you did, it would only be 1 story.
Sure. And we have discussed this with the applicant. I'm going to ask Mr. Belladin to come forward because he has extensive experience with this.
Great.
Good afternoon, Fred Belden, Clearscapes Architects. So you asked
some good questions, and the challenge is there are not black and white answers to any of these. So as you know, anything historic preservation related is a mix of quantitative and qualitative evaluation, which is why it's usually set up through standards and evaluated by professionals with years of experience and expertise regarding these things. So for instance, the standard that you refer to, again, it's not really a standard, it's a guide.
Yeah.
And the challenge with any of these is the way that this works in practice with the Park Service, and I can say this firsthand because we've gone through this with the Park Service. We're generally mocking up extents of additions on top of buildings because their evaluation isn't based on a cut and dried cross-section across the street. It's based on how the addition is viewed from a variety of vantage points, whether it feels like it's part of this building, whether it feels like it's part of the overall block massing. So the issue is by limiting within that, it's tying back to the existing zoning, but the acknowledgement is by going through RHDC, they will be able to apply their expertise in reviewing this. And the reality is we don't know where this will land yet because we don't yet have a program for the space. So what this is trying to do is balance the flexibility to do something that has real estate value with balancing the need to provide appropriate historic preservation. Now, at the risk of getting a little wonky, and stop me if I bore you, the other challenge with this is from a building code perspective, because when we go to apply an addition on top of a historic building, there's a 10% load path requirement, which means the second we exceed the structural load path, or alter the structural load path rather by more than 10%, it triggers current building code requirements. For our current building code requirements for an unreinforced masonry building like these, it's seismic that's going to govern. So the reality is, to do any of this, we're talking about needling a complete steel frame down through these structures. So from the development side of things, what the applicant is ultimately going to have to determine is if they can even achieve enough square footage on top of this building to justify the cost for what it is, knowing that the goal of this project is to provide space for average people and not multimillionaires. So the conditions are our best shot at trying to balance the expertise of the groups that you have identified for the city of Raleigh and allowing the flexibility for a program that, to be perfectly honest, doesn't yet exist because this is a rezoning stage.
Right, and I just want to make sure that we're all comfortable with, A, who's going to be interpreting the Secretary of Interior standards, and
Who isn't?
And I'm hearing it's going to be our professional preservation staff.
Well, they certainly
Likely.
could do it.
Yeah.
I think so. I mean, you know, what's the remedy if there's a disagreement? I mean, is a different sort of story. But I think if it's important that they go, that you can go there and work with them and come to some resolution about it.
The point is, what I'm hearing from the city attorney is, in terms of enforcing a zoning condition, it's much better for it to be our professional preservation staff than it is to send it to RHDC and
Well, RHDC has, as far as their binding decision-making authority, there's only certain things they couldn't have a hearing on it and render a decision, appeal to court, and that kind of thing. They have some advisory powers under the statute, but you'd probably be better served to work with the staff, I think. But that's, I guess.
So all I'm saying is, if we all agree that historic preservation is important here, and along with redevelopment of the site, then we would want to take the path that's going to give us the most certainty that we would achieve that historic preservation goal. And it sounds like a condition in this case that is that you accept the judgment of our professional preservation staff is the way to go.
Now, are you going to have to go to the feds to go through those same standards as well for tax credits?
If it's treated as a tax credit project, that would require going both through the state SHPO as well as the National Park Service.
But they may or may not.
Right. Maybe we can talk about that outside of the hearing, because if that entity gives the stamp of approval, you would probably want to go with that. If they didn't go to that, maybe that would be another backup, I suppose. You wouldn't want the feds to say, oh, it's fine, and then our staff to come back and say it's not. So there might be a way to craft some kind of condition where you can, if that review is done,
That it would govern.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
That makes
You know,
sense.
I'm glad to talk about that if you want to.
Mr. Belichick, I just want to understand something you said, which at the time made a lot of sense. I just want to re-ask the question.
Sure.
So in a two-story historic building, if you're talking about putting 5 stories on top of it, or whatever the
Three on
number is,
top.
3 on top of it, and you've got the weight capacity issue, as you related, so, and you thread the steel beam through a historic building, when you say those things to me in terms of cost, I wonder if it's ever a doable process.
Right.
If you're talking about putting units on the top that aren't for the very wealthy to afford, but are something in between, how do you make that number work?
That's why as written, it allows up to 3 stories, because to be perfectly frank, it will be on us to find the balance between what's affordable and what's acceptable from a historic preservation point of view. As we sit here today, no one can answer that
It
question.
would be optional. You wouldn't have to do it.
That is
It's
correct.
just optional. Okay, thank you. Additional questions,
So,
comments?
just one more question, that is, again, this is a discussion I've had with Thomas Sayer, and that is about the lack of affordable housing downtown, and he's said, yes, we understand this is a hugely important concern for the city of Raleigh, and that it's difficult to figure out how to do that in your project. We just finished seeing the Kane project, where they've said we actually can think creatively of ways to help and contribute to housing affordability. So I just want to ask you whether you're willing to have that conversation as well.
It's a good question, and I think, Clearscapes and 48 share the city's goals to providing public benefit with any community project that we're doing. I think I can say with confidence that we've demonstrated that over the last 30 years of work that we've done. So with that, we look at every project in particular, because each project presents a different set of opportunities and constraints. And with this particular project, with the activity going on within the warehouse district, the preservation of those 2 historic buildings, as well as providing meaningful public space in an area that has limited public space available to it, seem to be the natural fits for this particular project. I think it's important to understand that by doing that, I'd have to look at how some of the numbers were established as to the amount of square footage we're asking in increase to the by right, because 5 stories by right over the full 1 acre represents a certain square footage. We're actually preserving more than half of the site with historic buildings, not asking for a height increase. So in the great scheme of things, there's not a substantial increase in square footage that we're generating for this to be able to offset that cost. Kane was very generous, and they did a nice job explaining what their approach was. If I understand the math correctly on that, they were increasing from 611,000 square feet to 1.9 million square feet of square footage, which allowed them to provide that $1 million benefit. In our particular case, just to give you a sense of scale, that's an increase of 1.3 million square feet, which is 10 times the size of our total project. So I think that helps to illustrate some of the economy of scale at work here.
And so I just want to say, and I do absolutely appreciate your comments about your efforts to preserve these historic buildings. They are fabulous reminders of our city's past, and I do want to see them stay saved. And I think that is important to weigh that against other community benefits like affordable housing.
I understand.
But that's why I'm pushing so hard to make sure that the preservation piece really happens. It's great if you do it. It'd be great if the land got sold and someone else did it that would have that same kind of binding commitment. And I'd like to see that show up in the zoning condition.
I guess you could carry some of the standards over as well into the zoning condition is another way, I suppose, that I think there were certain ones that you were more interested in, and I think maybe when it came down to enforcement, they need to go visit with, Tanya Tully, but that's another thing that you could say,
Well-
what are the important components of the secretary standards, and maybe put them in there. That might be the easiest, another way to do it.
So,
So I'm sorry, just to respond, I actually agree with what you said about the situation being dynamic, and it depends on professional judgment, and don't try to turn a guideline into a standard. So I'd actually leave it to Tanya or whoever else on the professional staff would be making that evaluation.
I would like to say that not every project that comes before us is, in my opinion, appropriate for affordability. I'm not so sure that this project is. I think if we're truly concerned about the historic preservation, then that's what we should be focused on. Just an opinion as we move forward. So it appears that we need to continue this at the next meeting, which is June 18th, Tuesday. So we will report this out for the Tuesday meeting, June 18th. Okay?
Okay.
Yeah, to clarify, at your last meeting, you continued the hearing
Yes, we
to
have to.
Tuesday's meeting. So at Tuesday's meeting, this will reappear on your agenda.
Right.
And because you haven't made a recommendation at that time, you'll have to determine what
Which
date,
direction to go.
The hearing will continue to be held.
Yeah, I have to give a date certain.
Right. And at the risk of sounding obtuse, can I ask the logic of that versus holding it in committee then, if the questions are coming out of
I
committee?
think I have to have because we left it open, I have to take it back to council and give a date certain.
Okay.
So the item will continue in committee, but they have to take an action on Tuesday because they've already
Regardless.
continued the
Okay.
hearing
I've already
to
continued
that
once.
date.
Okay.
I can continue again, but I need to get permission to do that.
I understand.
Thank
Thank
you.
you for clarifying.
Thank you.
Quick question.
Yes.
If you went taller even, could you provide affordable housing?
We have parking limitations. So on this particular site, we have a lot of masters, one of which is the parking limitation. And in order to park the site, we're limited with the amount of square footage that we can provide.
Okay.
Crank up till 6.
Any other questions?
Okay. Any other questions? Thank you guys for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll see you on Tuesday.
Mhm.
Well, since the generator appears to have cranked up early, and we're all going to die of carbon monoxide in here, I'm going to call the meeting adjourned.